Good afternoon, all. Welcome to the Knowledge Quarter's virtual view of the Warburg Institute's exhibition titled Aby Warburg's Bilderatlas Mnemosyne. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. You can correct me later on if I'm wrong. My name is Bav Mehta, and I'm the events manager at the Knowledge Quarter. Some of you may not be aware of what the Knowledge Quarter is about, so I'll tell you a bit about us in a second, and a bit about today's event. But before we do that, just a few quick house rules. So please remain on mute. I think you should all be on mute automatically, but do stay on mute if you can. By all means, keep the chat function going, put your questions and your comments in the chat, introduce yourselves, say hi, and at the end, do leave us some feedback. So that's open for everyone to contribute to. And you may have noticed that the event is being recorded. This is so that we can edit it, tidy it up, and put it up on YouTube or something in the future. So for those who aren't able to join us today, they can watch it later on. But we're really, really pleased that so many of you have come to join us for this event. A bit about the Knowledge Quarter. So the KQ is a partnership of over 100 academic, cultural, research, scientific, and media organizations located in a 1-mile radius around King's Cross. And together our partners represent a concentration of knowledge and expertise to rival any in the world. Our partners include University College London, the British Library, Google, A Welcome, RADA, King's Place, and the Francis Crick Institute, as well as local community organizations such as the Somerstown Community Association. Amongst our proud partners is the University of London, and we're thrilled to be partnering with the Warburg Institute at the School of Advanced Study at the University of London for today's event. For those who don't know, the Warburg Institute is a research institution associated with the University of London. Its focus is the study of cultural history and the role of images in culture, cross-disciplinary and global. It's concerned with the histories of art and science and the relationship with superstition, magic, and popular beliefs. Based originally in Hamburg, in Germany, in 1933, the collection was moved to the University of London in 1944. In this event, we're going to get a glimpse of historian Aby Warburg's legendary Bilderatlas Mnemosyne, which was revealing Warburg's revolutionary understanding of art and culture theory. In the 1920s, Aby created the Bilderatlas Mnemosyne, tracing recurring visual themes and patterns across time, from antiquity to the Renaissance and beyond to contemporary culture. His approach provides inspiration for today's visually and digitally dominated world. It's the first time since 1929 that all 63 panels of Aby's work have been reconstructed. And we are delighted to be joined by Professor Bill Sherman, who's the director, and Dr. Claudia Weerdepool, who's the archivist at the Warburg Institute at the University of London. I'm going to pass it over to Bill and Claudia, who are going to take us through this journey. I'm going to stop sharing my slides so that Bill can share his.
That's fantastic. I'm doing that now. And I will go right to the beginning, which is where it should have been, and just say hello to everybody. And Bav, thank you so much for inviting us, and thanks to everybody for joining us from across the Knowledge Quarter, and indeed from wherever you are. It's a real pleasure to be able to be your tour guide today for this special visit to 2 historic exhibitions devoted to Aby Warburg and his so-called Bilderatlas, or image atlas, named after the goddess of memory, Mnemosyne, as he would have said, but I think, Bav, you did really well there. We all struggle with what we call the M word. It's actually a very, very historic trip, and I want to emphasize from the outset that while we're all locked down, I hope you'll find this exciting to be traveling first through space to Berlin, where the exhibitions were actually shown physically last autumn. But it's also a virtual trip through time, since the project is devoted to the reconstruction, as Bav says, for the first time since 1929 of this legendary project, this foundational project in many ways. As Bav also said, my fellow tour guide, partner in crime, main collaborator on this project was the Institute's archivist, Claudia Vedepol, and she's the real expert on A.B. Warburg. I'm going to say that right up front. So any hard questions go directly to Claudia. I'm also just going to emphasize from the outset that even if you're not that interested in A.B. Warburg himself or in this particular project, I think you'll find what we're offering gives you food for thought, because as we start to think about coming out of lockdown, everybody is learning lessons about the digital life we've had to live over these last 12 months now. And for the Warburg Institute, which was not a particularly wired institute, it was a really stubbornly analog institute, this has been a real experiment in going digital. And I think for both international collaboration, for bringing in people between England and Germany in our case, but also I think in terms of posterity, historical projects, being able to capture a historic project like this in a visitable, navigable, virtual environment was very exciting. So I'm really, really happy that we were able to do it, and really pleased to be able to have this opportunity to tell you a little bit about it and take you through it. We're going to try to race through it, although there's a lot to say. And it seems like every time Claudia and I talk about this, we start to say more and more. So please, Claudia and I, we will keep ourselves to time so that we have some time for Q&A at the end. And if we run out of time and you haven't been able to ask a question or get yours answered, then just keep in touch, because we're both easy to find. And indeed, the project itself remains on the Warburg Institute website, which I'll show you in a minute. Now, of course, the project would be meaningless, and the name of it would be meaningless without a little bit of background to the person who created it, and to something about the institution and the materials that he left to us here in London. A.B. Warburg, as Bav said, born in Hamburg in 1866, the eldest son of one of Europe's great banking families, really turned upside down by his study of the Italian Renaissance, and in particular the paintings of Botticelli, and really decided from a very early stage that he was far more interested in books than in banks. And so he sold his birthright to the family bank to his younger brother, Max, in exchange for any book he ever asked for. And it was a great deal for A.B., not such a good deal for Max. And what that allowed him to build up was a great personal library, and then a great research institute, which was eventually opened in Hamburg in the building that he had built next to his house in 1926. And it's called, you can see the letters on the front of the building on the left in brick, the Kulturwissenschaftliche Bibliothek Warburg, or the Warburg Library for the Cultural Sciences. And maybe its most famous feature is this elliptical reading room that you can see on the right, which he had designed to his own specifications, and which became a place not only for reading books, but also for showing images, doing small exhibitions, and also for public events, like the one we're devoted to here. But of course, as Bav also said, when the Nazis came to power in 1933, the entire institute, all of its holdings, its furniture, its people, its projects were all transferred to London. And fortunately and happily, London gave them a good home. And by 1944, they found a permanent home in the University of London. In 1957-8, this building, which I am in fact sitting in, and which many of you will know since it's right in the heart of the Knowledge Quarter, at the interface of Gordon, Woburn, and Tavistock Square, Torrington Squares, Tavistock next door, we actually occupy the last building of the central estate of the University of London's Bloomsbury Master Plan. And it was built by the builder of that master plan, Charles Holden. All of the materials came to London, the books, the photos, the sort of photo library or photo collection, and that's where the materials from this most famous project ended up. In the course of the 20th century, particularly toward the very end in the 1990s and then the last 20 years, maybe the thing that most people know about A.B. Warburg, if they know anything, is this project. This has really captured the imagination of the public as well as of scholars over the last 30 years. And it is the one that we are going to talk about today and show you in its reconstructed form in our exhibitions. It was A.B. Warburg's kind of life work. It actually was only worked on in the last few years of his life. We think about 1925 until he died in 29, but it really represents the issues and the materials that he worked on for his entire career. This final version, and there are in fact 3 documented versions from the last 2 years of his life, has 63 large black cloth covered panels, onto which a total of 971 images of diverse media, diverse subjects, diverse cultures are all pinned in a very provisional way. The pins are visible. They're named after the goddess of memory in ancient Greece, Mnemosyne, as they would have said in Germany, or Mnemosyne, maybe better in modern Greek. But the mother of the 9 muses is equally important in thinking about what Warburg might have meant in naming this image atlas after her. As I say, it's at once a pictorial map of the afterlife of antiquity, which was his great subject, particularly the afterlife of antiquity in the Renaissance period. But it was also, and has become increasingly seen as, one of the foundational projects of modernity, in some ways marking the death of an old type of linear art history based on styles and famous artists, and in a way marking the birth of a new kind of image science for scholars, curators, artists, and now increasingly even digital designers. It was called in August of last year in a great feature piece in Germany's popular weekly magazine, Der Spiegel, the Holy Grail of the Humanities. And it's a really nice phrase because it captures 2 important things. One is the, as I said, legendary status or foundational status of this project. Along with Walter Benjamin's Arcades project, it's probably the most important early 20th century humanities project. But it's also a holy grail in the sense that it's something people have been looking for because it's been very, very hard to find. Hasn't exactly been lost, but it has not been very visible. And with that, I'm going to hand over, before we make it visible, to Claudia. And Claudia, you can take us through a little bit of its origins and development by way of background.
Yes, happy to be here too. Welcome from me, and I'll jump right into the subject. So you can see 10 of the panels here. They look different from what you've seen on the first slide. So they're black and white and not in color. And these are the historic photographs from 1929. They were taken of the state of the atlas of the 63 panels, these are only 10, in which Warburg left the atlas basically at the time of his death, and then with the technology of the time, photographed really as an aide-memoire for his followers, the generation who made it their task to edit the atlas and bring it out and sort of made it known to the world. But that, as we know it, there is no printed, edited edition of the atlas, never materialized. And we stay with this, we stay with this slide. And I say a little bit about the background, because I think to follow the tour, you have to understand, we thought, a little bit more about what Warburg's atlas actually is. So in very brief, it's a purely visual exploration of the afterlife of motifs, ideas, concepts originating in antiquity. The afterlife of antiquity, Bill has already said, throughout all media. So roughly following Darwin, Warburg believed that the origin of expression as a basis for depictions of expression lies in the early stages of humanity. If you look at the atlas, you will notice it's heavily Eurocentric in its focus. In this respect, Warburg was a typical German scholar of the late 19th century, with an education that focused on Greece as the cradle of Western civilization. So he looked further to Babylonian Near Eastern cultures, but he remained interested in their influence on Europe. So in particular, regarding the manifold renewals of mythology. His atlas is devoted to the expression of emotions. He famously called these expressions pathos-formen. Some of you might have heard that term, which has become very popular independently. So expressions of emotions and depictions of the universe, that is the macrocosm in which the human being is placed as a microcosm. According to Warburg, the relationship between both entities, so macrocosm and microcosm, is expressed in myths and cults, whose afterlife he's exploring, in particular in the Atlas. So he drew on examples, and he had worked on these examples throughout his academic life, many published in independent studies. But the Bilderatlas should have united all these studies by putting them on a universally valid theoretically basis. So broadly speaking, a theory of expression based on empathy and memory. The title Mnemosyne, he would have said in German, is thus alluding to both classical mythology, we already said Mnemosyne, mother of the muses, who helped the ancient bard to remember, and the neurological term Mneme, which was coined by Warburg's contemporary Richard Simon, and thus referring to the sciences of his time. So a hugely ambitious project which remained unfinished. Warburg struggled to settle on constellations on each panel, and he never made it to write his commentary. So for us to understand what he really meant with each individual panel, it all remained a big laboratory in which he tried to sort of highlight his lines of thought through these constellations of images. We go to the next slide. So just to give you a bit of an idea how the whole project started, we can sort of trace it back to around 1905 when Warburg wanted to write a book, a substantial book on the history of style. So he wanted to give a really new explanation about the coming together of the typical early Renaissance style, the 15th century Florentine style, with a new psychological sort of approach to it. And he thought that he could explain it as a battle between a very popular Northern European style, like a Netherlandish style of calm, introverted figures, and a pathos-laden, typically Italian, like anti-classicizing style. So if we go further to the next, no, I have to add, so to explain this, that for this book, he was planning to have an atlas, and he explicitly calls it atlas. You can see it on the top left corner, an apparatus of printed material, of printed images, which might have been a portfolio or a printed volume. So that's really where this idea of an atlas starts. If we go to the next photo, you can see what he probably had in mind around 1905 with this printed panel or plate, which just one of three, belongs to a little portfolio for one of his case studies. So we can see it on the left, how he drafted it and how it was indeed printed on the right side. And if we go to the next slide, this is from the 1920s, 1927, in fact. So he used the panel really to draft his ideas about the afterlife of expression in images. But only in the 1920s, he used panels very early on, but only from the 1920s, we do have photographic records of how he used them. And this is, as I said, an example from 1927. We see his elliptical reading room again with these horizontal panels put in place and not containing only photographs, but in fact also you can see it at the bottom corner, books having sort of put in place there. So he compares his examples from reproductions and from the originals in printed books and make it really sort of visible. Now we come to the title. So the title is Mnemosyne, we said that, but there is a very condensed subtitle. And this subtitle, the condensation of it, it's a good example of Warburg's ambition to condense the complexity of the theory behind his panels, and also his struggle to make it really comprehensive. An all-in-one title, I'd say. And I just read it out on the top there, a sequence of images for the art historical reflection on the coining of classicizing expressions in the representation of processes of both cosmic and human motion in Renaissance Europe. You've got the original German. below. That was the state in 1928. And in 1929, he had it slightly shorter by saying, a sequence of images for the analysis of the function of precoined values of expression in the representation of life and motion in the art of the European Renaissance. So with slight variations, but always really circulating this very condensed core. And if we see on my last slide, this is the facsimile edition of the 1929 panels with legends, which was published for the first time in the year 2000. So this was the standard edition of the Atlas until it was all reconstructed in 2019, 2020. So this is really where, like, the book we all refer to until now, but it is not more. It doesn't attempt to interpret Warburg's constellations or anything like that. It's only really a reconstruction, or let's say an identification of each and every individual object you can see on the historic photographs.
Fantastic.
Okay, I'll hand back to Bill here.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you so much. And yes, just to take it directly from that point, they're also, of course, just reproducing the single images of entire panels as photographed in 1929. And what really took us to where we got to with the project that we're going to show you in a minute is this great breakthrough exhibition. There were a whole series from the 1990s onwards of attempts to show the Atlas as an exhibition or as a display using reproductions and reproductions of Warburg's reproductions. And you can see on the left in ZKM in Karlsruhe in 2016, they did precisely that. Instead of the single full blow up of the single panel, they went down to the scale of individual works, individual pieces, but they still worked with reproductions from those 1929 photographs. But at the same time, in that 2016 exhibition, there was this experiment that you see on the right, which was they came to the Warburg Institute here in London and found A.B. Warburg's original working materials for two panels, 32 and 48, I think they were. And those panels were also shown just to see really what you could do and what it would do in terms of our impression and our interpretation of these panels. And it was successful enough and influential enough that it encouraged the curators, who were Roberto Ort, curator from Hamburg, and also Axel Heil, a professor at ZKM in Karlsruhe, to continue and see if they could actually reconstruct all of the panels with all of the materials. They proposed that to the Haus der Kulturen der Welt, or HKW, in Berlin. And their director, Bernd Scherer, said, yes, let's do it as an exhibition. And then, of course, we had to say yes. We did say yes. 2018, we agreed on the project. And then in the course of 2019, in fits and starts, we were able to do the work together as a collaboration. And we were able to find about between 80 and 85% of the material from Warburg's original material still here. And as you see, and this is the exhibition we'll show you in a minute. But another really amazing thing happened at the same time, which is that the State Museums Berlin, and particularly the painting curator Neville Rowley, decided that they would like to also jump on this opportunity, being obsessed with Warburg and obsessed with the Atlas, but in possession of many of the original works that are actually pictured or imaged in the Atlas. They decided to do a parallel exhibition about a 15-minute walk away in the National Painting Gallery, where they put 50 objects from Berlin State Museum's collections that are the originals that Warburg worked with, if that makes sense, and I'll show you. And so in fact, what the two exhibitions do together is give you Warburg's finished panels, such as they were in 1929, but also many of the originals that he put into the original reproductions in the panels. So original reproductions, original panels. And it was a really historic moment. And part of what's wonderful about our exhibition virtual site is that you can go between the two, as you'll see. Finally, just to finish our framing and our introduction, the book that was produced for the HKW exhibition was this very, very large, oversized facsimile published by Hatchikants. We were very, very happy that we were able to do it, given that we had reconstructed the material and that they looked very striking and very different. So what this book actually represents is the first time the atlas is reproduced in book form, in color, on very large scale, so you can really make sense of the details, and in English. Fortunately, in November, we were very happy to be awarded Apollo Magazine's Book of the Year for that book. Finally, this takes us to the final thing, which, as I said, was part of our thinking from the start, because the exhibition, in fact, was supposed to open in April. And because of the first lockdown, it was delayed until the autumn. And we were even worried at a certain point that the thing wouldn't happen at all. And so we started to think about whether it would be worth capturing this digitally. And given restrictions on international travel, we knew there would be a lot of people who couldn't come. And so we were very eager, and I'm now just gonna switch over to the actual exhibition tour. And that's on our website. So just the Warburg website, you can look it up. It's the first thing here, Bilderatlas Mnemosyne virtual exhibition. If you click on it, you're taken here, and then you should double click on that image and it will make it a full screen image. So this is now the live virtual exhibition site. And if you want to know more about why we did it and what we did technologically, here, look in the About section. It will tell you who funded it, and also the fantastic Marco Vedana at documentart.de, who actually made it, who designed it and did it for us. And it tells you a little bit more about the exhibition. And then if you want, watch the introduction, which is a video of me introducing the Warburg Institute, this project, and their combined histories. But without further ado, we will jump into the virtual tour itself. And as you can see, you can start with either virtual tour. You can go straight to HKW, or you can go straight to the original objects in the Gemälde gallery. But we'll go here directly into HKW. And I'm gonna, again, make it full screen. And if you want to hear a little bit of an introduction from the director of HKW, you'll see Bernd floating here and bouncing with his pink play button. But we'll go right into this extraordinary building. Worth actually looking at the building at some point, because it's an extraordinary piece of 1950s architecture. But we'll, without further ado, again, go into the exhibition through the front door. And this is the main hall where you see the entire Bilderatlas arrayed here. Now, while I'm here on the steps, just very quickly, I'm going to just point out a little bit of navigation instruction. And there's a how to use button here with the light bulb on the right. And that will tell you what all of the buttons do and how you should make your way around. I find the home button always very useful because it always returns you back to this point on the steps, the entrance steps. And I also, the only other thing I would say is especially useful is the show thumbnails. So it'll show you all of the panels from, from A to 79. We said there were 63 panels. As you'll see in a minute, there are some gaps in the numbering. So the final panel is numbered 79, but there are only 63. And the first three are lettered A, B, and C. And on these thumbnails, what's useful is it shows the icon if there's extra content. And one of the things that we tried to do with this virtual tour that we weren't able to do in the exhibition itself is offer more curatorial guidance and more expert commentary. So you'll see these play buttons mean that there's a video commentary talking you through that panel. We can look a little bit at those later. This icon, the binoculars icon, is the sign that there will be an object there that is represented in both exhibitions, and it will take you, if you click on the binoculars, directly into the other exhibition. So we'll show you those functions in a minute. Before we actually get into the room, I wanted to just show you some of these extra functions. So Claudia, do you want to just set us up a little bit with the big picture, with the elliptical shape,
Yeah,
also with A, B, and C, with panels A, B, and C.
Yeah, while before we jump to A, B, and C, just a very quick word. We have already seen the photographs of the elliptical reading room, and this is just a little bit an attempt to allude to that form, which was very close to Warburg's heart, because the ellipse was a symbolical form. We heard a little bit about more about this when we come to panel C. For him, it was a symbolical form because it alluded to Johannes Kepler's discovery of the elliptical orbits of the planets. And for Warburg, that moment was really the breakthrough of the modern world in terms of modern sciences, an idea of the cosmos based on observation and calculation rather than on speculation. But the ellipse is also a bipolar or figure, and bipolarity is another sort of important concept for Warburg, which sort of, as a concept relating to the human psyche, always pondering between the rational and the irrational. And for him, it's a constitutive concept to explain culture and the sort of, the constitution of culture and the expression in images. So that's why the ellipse was chosen for the core of his library, for his reading room, and now for the decades of panels, so it's always 10, to reconstruct them in this slightly elliptical form in the hall.
Exactly.
So we see like the first ones are A, B, C. We said 63 altogether, and they don't have numbers, they have letters. And for Warburg, the letters meant this is the sort of preliminary theoretical material I'm showing. You can see maps, and I prefer it's sort of more diagrams than to say it's more diagrams than maps on these. Warburg said they are devoted to the epistemology of the creation of symbols. And the symbol is the core of expression for him. It's either an image, more imitating the world, or an abstract sign in the most extreme sense, which is really, a symbol of something which, an abstract form of something which looks different in reality. Yeah, and so the first three panels, he sets out his approach to this. And I think we wanted to jump immediately to panel C as an example.
Actually, we do that. I mean, again, it's probably worth just saying, if you're looking for what he would call an orientation, getting your bearings, really panels A, B, and C are all devoted in some way to the available tools for visualizing the relationship between people and the cosmos in one way or another. There's time here with a descent of a family tree. There's the movement of things around Europe, and there's the celestial map, the heavens, the star map with constellations in the heavens. And these are just examples or templates almost for the kinds of relations that he's mapping in the course of the 63 panels. And then we go to C, and I'll just very quickly play Claudia's video commentary here, just for this as an example so that you can see both what's going on in this very unusual panel and also this extra feature of Claudia commenting.
Wir sehen auf der Tafel C einzelne Abbildungen, die zunächst nichts miteinander zu tun zu haben scheinen. Erst auf den zweiten Blick erzählen sie die Geschichte des Verstehens und Beherrschens des Universums. Der Planet Mars ist das Leitmotiv und der 1630 gestorbene Astrologe und Astronom Johannes Kepler, hier repräsentiert durch sein Werk die Leitfigur, der Warburg eine entscheidende Rolle bei der Entstehung des modernen Weltbilds zuschrieb. Seine Entdeckungen waren in den mathematischen Wissenschaften der alten Griechen bereits angelegt. Ein Blatt aus einem astrologischen Kalender des 15. Jahrhunderts zeigt den Planeten Mars als Beherrscher des Monats März. Der Horoskopie nach sind den in seinem Zeichen geborenen Kindern die Eigenschaften des griechischen Gottes eingeprägt. Sie sollen, wie man hier sieht, unter anderem zu Kriegern und Dieben werden. Kepler beherrschte die Astrologie. Er stellte aber nicht nur Horoskope, sondern kannte auch die Mathematik der alten Griechen. Seinen Modellen des Universums legte er das von Kopernikus knapp 100 Jahre zuvor wiederentdeckte heliozentrische Weltbild zugrunde, also die Annahme, dass die Planeten um die Sonne kreisen. Eins von Keplers Modellen zeigt das Universum, theoretisch, mit den Umlaufbahnen der Planeten in Form von ebenmäßigen sogenannten platonischen Körpern, Kugel, Würfel, Pyramide und so weiter. Kurze Zeit später errechnete er, Kepler, dann die Umlaufbahn des Mars und erhielt eine unerwartete geometrische Figur, die Ellipse. Dies war ein entscheidender Schritt zum heutigen Verständnis des Sonnensystems. Ungefähr 300 Jahre später, im Jahr 1929, machte die moderne Luftfahrt einen großen Schritt bei der Nutzung des Universums. Dem deutschen Kapitän Hugo Eckener war eine Weltumrundung im Zeppelin gelungen. Dabei hatte Eckener mittels eines technischen Geräts, dem Thermometer, ein Unwetter umschifft und seine Passagiere heil auf den Boden zurückgebracht. Er war für Warburg ein weiterer Held der Beherrschung des Kosmos. Mit Tafel C veranschaulicht er also, wie eine rationale Erklärung des Universums auf der Grundlage von Beobachtungen und Berechnungen eine mythologische Weltdeutung ersetzt, die sich auf die Annahme stützt, die unbelebte Natur sei beseelt. Und er zeigt, wie das Foto, das objektive Bild, ein subjektives Modell ersetzt.
Fantastic. So that's a good example. It's quite an abstract image cluster. And so actually, Claudia, let's go straight to 55 and show very quickly. We're jumping way ahead now because we've already gone through a first section. Actually, I should probably go back here, a first section on what he calls ancient predispositions, some kind of templates or paradigms, iconic images, iconic motifs that will lay the foundations for what comes later. We then have the return of antiquity to Italy via the Near East in particular, a lot on astrology in that section. Here we have this thing Claudia was mentioning earlier about the North and Florence with the probably most famous single image, from the cluster, which is, sorry, hold on, I'm coming back. You have to be careful when you double click. Which is this one, this extremely famous working out of the thing that in fact he had written his PhD dissertation on, the ancient dynamics and motifs that are motivating Botticelli in his two most famous paintings here, The Birth of Venus and The Spring, Primavera. And then we get to some really clear examples of the kinds of lines that he's drawing. It's a kind of example again of one of the really, really clear tracings on these panels of visual motifs through time. So Claudia, do you want to just talk a little bit about we call it the Manet panel because it has, of course, down here, the famous Manet painting, The Breakfast on the Lawn,
And in the short term we have, I will be brief and I will really just concentrate on this one motif. And this is the famous Raimondi, where the cursor is now, or was just Raimondi engraving after an invention by Raphael. And they are the three famous river gods in the corner. And it's really, the panel is about the afterlife of this motif and the idea of having them set in a landscape. So when he was in Rome in 1929, Warburg discovered the painting, which is right in the middle now, which is by a Dutch painter, so 17th century Dutch painter, which for him was the missing link between the Raimondi and the Manet. And if we go to the Manet, and it's clear, this is sort of common knowledge now, that the group of picnickers are really sort of referring back to that invention of the river gods, which actually go back in Raimondi or Raphael to three ancient late Roman sarcophagi, which are not on this panel, but on panel 4, with the ancient prototypes, so in the group of the ancient prototypes.
Perfect.
Then Warburg discovered this Dutch painting. You want to show panel 4 quickly?
In fact, I do want to show
yeah.
panel 4.
And we've got them, yeah, for example, the one like second column, second from the top.
Yes.
That's one of these, yes, exactly. And then for Warburg, the important thing was the Dutch painting, where he said, this shows the transition from a purely mythological scene into putting the whole group into a landscape, which doesn't have the whole mythological context. And that's the important prehistory of Manet, then really having a landscape painting, and that sort of as a, like, let's say, an icon of modernity, where really the painting is stripped of any symbolic or mythological meaning or context.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and that's really in very brief terms what
very brief, but very archetypal, a very useful example. And we don't have too much time, so we won't do all of the other examples we were going to go through, and again would encourage you to do some exploring on your own. But in coming back to panel 4, I'll point out that there's a special feature here. There's a commentary by me, in fact, on it if you want to play it, but also the arrow button, which takes you to the back, which is only on 3 of the panels. We were able to make this extraordinary reproduction of what the backs of the images look like, showing you from our own collection here in the photo collection at the Warburg Institute, all of the notes and stamps and everything on the back. And there's quite interesting information about that, including in some cases, some early notes by Warburg and his collaborators, and also in this case, an indication that it was at one point on panel 7 instead of panel 4. So all kinds of very interesting material. And so at some point when you make it through this on your own, do spend a little bit of time looking at this really unusual feature. In the exhibition itself, for the lucky few who were able to be there in person, I think this was almost as much of a revelation as the fronts. And now the publisher of the complete works of Warburg are actually talking about doing an edition of the backs of the panels, which would be an interesting thing to move on to. But quickly, Claudia, let's now jump on panel 32. And maybe, do you want to give just a second of background about what this panel is doing?
Exactly. So this is from the group which Bill has mentioned, is about the battle of styles in Florentine, in Florentine early Renaissance art. It's the theme of the panel is courting, and it's on one hand the chivalry courting of women, and then it's opposite, it's inversion, and a motif which Warburg thought is basically a rustic kind or crude kind of humor. Courting of women, lust, and the inversion is the women battling for a trouser. So that motif was very popular starting in the 15th century, and sort of its more grotesque form is the folklore version of the Moresca, the Morris dance, the sword dance, which is still popular in British folklore. And an even more sort of abstract, drastic form is when the animals themselves are dancing. But we now want to focus on this motif of the battle for the trousers, which Warburg traced through all sorts of media and arts. And here we see an object which is called a tine. It's either a sort of bridal chest or a dairy product container. We're just discussing it with our Norwegian colleagues. And we have got the historic photograph of it. So Warburg owned this object. And because of its theme, its motif, this battle of the trousers, he at some stage decided to donate the object, which he had acquired in 1896, in a toy shop in Dalen in Norway, to the Kupferstichkabinett of the Berlin State Museums, at the time Kaiser Friedrich Museum. And so it was there in the collection together with the engravings, which depict exactly this very same motif. over the years, like war, separation, two German, like the state museums in two German, sort of different German countries. The memory was lost about this object. It was given to an ethnographic museum. I think it's now called Museum Europäischer Kulturen, where it was sort of left in storage. And only the curators of the Gemäldegallery exhibition reconstructed the provenance and the history of this. And now for the very first time in their exhibition, it was reunited with the engravings. Yeah, so where like in a collection put back into a neighborhood where Warburg wanted to see it. And that's a little very nice sub-story of the reconstruction of this collection. Yeah, and the partner exhibition at the Gemäldegallery.
Exactly.
Sort of referring forwards and backwards between the two. And that's what you can do with a click on the binoculars for the
binoculars. Yeah, it took us about a 20-minute walk across the Tiergarten in Berlin from the HKW to the Gemäldegallery, which we are now in here in this exhibition for this other exhibition called Between Cosmos and Pathos, Berlin Works for Maybe Warburg's Mnemosyne Atlas. And here you see it was really a modest exhibition, but quite an exquisite one. And in a way, an equally important act of reconstruction, just to see the relationship, as I said at the beginning, between original objects like this massive, highly colorful painting with Ghirlandaio, and you've got Botticelli down there. You've got a fantastic Carpaccio painting here with the figure of melancholy in it. Alongside these clusters, highly mediated, black and white, often excerpts or details that Warburg is picking up from a larger object. And so you can see how, in this case, how he's thinking between original object and reproduction as an instrument of art history or of inquiry. And so that was the purpose really of this exhibition, and it was extremely successful. And again, very, very lucky that it happened. It was put together in less than a year with a real shoestring budget. But it was for them, I think, the first time that the 19 or so different museums in the state museums of Berlin have actually lent all together internally for an exhibition like this with 50 objects from 10 different collections. So I'm going to finish with this object here, and it'll be the last thing, and then we'll jump back over into the other exhibition space, and then we'll have some time for maybe a few questions. This, of course, here, the Maiolica plate featuring the famous figure of Laocoon, the serpent covered figure, because A.B. Warburg is so interested in the history of serpents, which we can talk about more if there's time later, having worked in the 1895 to 6 period in New Mexico and Arizona on the Native American serpent rituals. He's very interested in the serpent as a motif. And this object here was known only from a black and white photograph, as it appears indeed in Warburg's Atlas. But when Neville, the curator, called this object up in his own museum's collections, this is what came back in a box in fragments. And this was one of many, many objects, hundreds of objects in Berlin State Museums that was destroyed at the end of World War II when there was a series of fires in the bunkers, in the storage bunkers for the State Museum's collections. Many priceless works, 3 Caravaggios, lots and lots of priceless wooden work was destroyed. And a lot of the ceramic work was heated to such a level that it exploded or shattered. And in this case, what's left is these pieces with this fraught, tortured figure covered in serpents and now charred beyond recognition, but reassembled in this fragile reconstruction just for the purposes of this one-off reconstruction pair of exhibitions. So it was a very moving little exhibit and one of many little life stories that I think gave this project such power. So if you click on the binoculars, you're back at Warburg's use of that same image in the Bilderatlas back in HKW in the other hall. And here we are, and I'm going to just leave it there. Claudia, I think there's so much more to say, but I know that there are some questions. And so I'm going to try to get into the chat and see what people are asking us. And it would be very good for us to have a chance to do this. So
yeah, I can read out the questions to save us a bit of time. We don't have very long, I'm afraid. We need to end the event in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure.
But I think we all got carried away with the wonder of this absolutely fantastic virtual exhibition. And as someone just sitting back and watching it, it was absolutely thrilling. A couple of quick questions in the chat. Does the original building in Hamburg still exist? I'm assuming it's the museum. It's still there.
And the building, Warburg's library, it is, yeah, it's owned by the city of Hamburg. It's used by the university. It's basically an events place for academic, small symposia. It's stripped of its library because that's in London. It's at the Warburg Institute, but they have rebuilt a reading room. So the reading room itself is looking, and they have rebuilt it completely in the 1990s because it was privately owned in the meantime. But it's very much intact now.
Another question we had was, who was the Dutch painter who adopted the Raimondi trio?
I think we still don't know. The painting has just been rediscovered. It's owned by the state, and it's sort of in one of the state buildings. It's not where Warburg saw it anymore. It's a good question. I would have to look it up who Warburg thought it was, but it's anonymous.
Yeah. Just a question. I mean, as watching this, it came to mind that we're very used to seeing things like this today when we're asked to make mood boards or to make scrapbooks, and we collect images and we stick them in a particular combination. And of course, things like Pinterest and Instagram and all of that essentially is, collecting your favorite pictures that you've taken or that you found on the internet and then putting them together. But was this the first of its kind? Can we say the origins of our modern culture and our relationship with images, can it date back to what Warburg did?
So it's called Bilderatlas, and there is a tradition of Bilderatlas as a medium, and it's very much a sort of an educational book, to have something which is very heavily drawing on images rather than on text, sort of trying to explain that. So yeah, basically panels, and that goes back to the time before photography. But Warburg uses this medium to say something different. And the selections are really not random at all. He's always having a story behind his selection and also behind the constellation in which he presents his images. Yeah. So in that respect, he's new, and that's made it also exciting and yeah.
Bab, if I can also offer my own extension of that answer, which I agree with entirely. I mean, what this is partly about is what kind of link or association connects one image with another image, right? That's the key question. In Pinterest, it can be that you like it. It can be it's the same color. It can be largely morphology. It's usually going to be something about its physical shape or appearance. In Warburg, it can be that, as we saw with the Raimondi, with the trio of river gods becoming Manet's figures, right? That's there, that's in this project. But then what do you make of something like this? This panel is very, very different. So what is connecting figures of golf, a dead mother with the child discovering her, a fish cookbook, advertising from toilet paper, advertisements for shipping lines. This panel is one of the ones that I love most because I don't get it. I don't understand the lines of association. And so that's why I think it's extremely productive to have this in such vivid and visible and usable form, because we really, in a way, have only begun to work these problems out, even though there's a century of scholarship on it now.
Yeah. You have to delve back into Warburg's mind to get it.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, someone's asked the question, what was Warburg's understanding of or the legacy of psychoanalysis? It seems very Jungian, says our commenter in the chat.
it's like there is a lot of work on comparing him with Freud. They're certainly coming from the same background, like the sort of the whole field of psychology around 1900 is a huge field in itself. Psychoanalysis, I think I've written a little bit about it and looked into Warburg's remarks about it, was a bit too much threatening. He's trying to do a psychoanalysis of civilization and not of the individual.
Yeah.
The individual is, of course, behind everything. But he had his own psychological treatment following World War I. He didn't undergo psychoanalysis. He found it was like delving too deeply into the slums of the soul. So he didn't want to have it revealed all. But of course, there is like in the whole sort of text behind it, the idea of having a psychological explanation of, in his case, history and civilization, or the human sort of human
but of course
itself has similar origins.
But and that's all exactly right. And of course, some of the most interesting work that's being done right now is precisely on that 19th century, early 20th century science of the mind. And I think that work is really, really helpful. And we've got some great people doing that right now. But there's also this afterlife in archetypal studies. So Jungian, of course, is about archetypes versus Freud. And these visual or symbolic archetypes are something with connections to Warburg's approach to cultural meaning. And so there is a Jungian component, but he himself wasn't directly involved in that, and probably wouldn't have seen it as psychoanalytic.
Now we've got lots of other questions in the chat, but we have run out of time. I'm afraid we've got to end this on the dot, I'm afraid. But the last question I do want to ask is, will this exhibition, in the way that you've presented it, this virtual exhibition, will it be up online indefinitely, or is there a cutoff?
Let me just say that quickly, and in fact, I'll save the chat, or Bav, if you could save it so that I see, because I know a lot of the people asking the questions, and I'll be happy to respond to them directly. So yes, quickly, the virtual platform that we've made here is for posterity. It should be available for free for as long as we can keep it up. So that is good. And in fact, we're interested in people using it for teaching or using it for seminars. And so that's there for good. We also now have the extension of this exhibition into 3 other venues. The next 2 are in Bonn, in Bundeskunsthalle, and then Hamburg. It'll go back home to Hamburg in the summer. That's for sure. There's also an Italian venue that we're talking to, so that we hope will come next. And then eventually it all comes back to London, comes home to the Warburg Institute in London, where we will show it in various ways, including an interface between digital and physical. That's really the big picture.
Fantastic. And there is a book that's available to buy on the Warburg Institute website, so it's all of it there.
It's worth every penny.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much, Bill and Claudia, for your expert knowledge, taking out time. You're clearly very passionate about this. You've instilled interest in all the people who've been watching this event. And, you know, it's absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to dive into the website properly myself, and also look forward to seeing the physical pieces once they arrive in London, hopefully not too far off. But thank you for your time, and thank you for everyone who attended. Please do leave your comments before you leave. Sorry that we've overrun by a couple of minutes, but it's a fascinating subject. These things happen.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for hosting it.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so you save the.
Yes, I've got the chats.
I thought the question. Okay.
That okay, I think that's everybody gone. It's just us left. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Hope that you both enjoyed that. I certainly did.
No, it's always nice to have the opportunity.
Always
And
nice.
actually